This presentation is brought to you by the Nicholas County Historical and Genealogical Society. Our guest speaker today is Amy Starcher, D.A.R. Registrar from Summersville.
Process of me working on my family tree was trying to dig into my ancestor of my mom's dad's family, which was the King from Morgantown. So in digging into the Kings, I dug into the Lanhams, the Austins, the Dortons, which is when I found my first Revolutionary War patriot, which was Henry Dorton, which in the records is Dalton, D-A-L-T-O-N, Dalton, D-O-L-T-O-N, or Dorton, D-O-R-T-I-N or O-N. And in the records, Henry was a mulatto, which at the time I really didn't know what that meant. And so he was taken from his mother in 1750 and given to a family called the Sam Pruitt family. And so I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about today. And you guys are record keepers. I mean, it sounds like you guys have been doing genealogy since way before I've been involved in genealogy. So I'm not probably going to tell you anything today that you don't know and haven't already looked at in your own family searches. But the records do exist out there. If you know where to look at, where to get started. There's a lot of records out there that people don't utilize. Sounds like, I'm not sure what your name is. Junior. So deeds, wills, probate records I've used. As the registrar for the Daughters of the American Revolutionary chapter, I'm the one in charge of helping our prospective members get their applications ready to go into national headquarters in Washington, D.C. So I help them get all their records together, do the application, and we submit it to Washington, D.C. for review. When you get past a certain time frame, you guys all know, the records you have to get creative. So in doing that, and being as the registrar, you can't just use birth, marriage, and death records to prove your generations and your lineage. So,
did you say what, Amy? You can't use what?
Well, after a certain point, the death, marriage, and birth records just aren't always there.
Okay.
So you have to, sometimes you have to use other records to prove those generations from one to the other.
Okay.
So you have to just get creative with where you're looking for your records. In doing my own research, because I do love history, my sister, if she was here, she would tell you I'm the biggest nerd ever. But I'm the only one in my family, my immediate family, who's sentimental to these memories, and I want to keep them as long as I can and keep the names alive. I transpose, and probably like you guys, and Mary was telling me, and Elaine, they had records and records and records and files and notebooks. I transposed all of my spirals to Family Tree Maker about 12 to 15 years ago, put everything online on my computer. So I have 300 pages of all of my ancestors. There's 10,000 people on my tree, and I have everything sourced. A distant family member and I had a tiff several years ago. I think maybe Elaine or was it Mary said you hadn't started out by keeping sources. And so I didn't in the beginning do any of my sources. I just kind of took what people told me as face value and that's the way it was. Well, you can't do that. So I don't use anything anymore that I cannot source, whether it be a birth record, a marriage record, or a land record. In working with the D.A.R, we do have to get creative sometimes about where we're looking for these records. I use a lot of off-the-wall type of websites, pension records. I use Family Search a lot. I use Ancestry. One of my favorite tools on Ancestry that I found is called the Card Catalog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
What was that again, Amy?
It's called the Card Catalog.
C-A-R-D?
C-A-R-D, yeah. It's under the search bar in Ancestry, but it lets you type in a keyword. Like if you're looking, say you're looking in Virginia in a certain county, like say Augusta, you're looking for a particular record in Augusta County, under the card catalog search in Ancestry, you can type in Augusta County, or you don't even have to have county. You can type in Augusta County. It'll pull up any book or record in the Ancestry database with Augusta in the title. And then you can search within that book or whatever it is of the record. And I usually search by last name once I get that book pulled up, because it pulls up everybody with the last name that I'm looking for. Family search is kind of the same way. Family search I wasn't real familiar with until probably the last couple of years. My best friend is also a registrar for a D.A.R chapter in Ohio, and she's on a committee at the national level. She's kind of given me some training in family search and where to find these documents and helped me along the way. But does anybody here kind of the Jeremiah Odell family? You? Well, then I don't tie directly into him, but through his brother. So that
Amy, I'm not good at hearing. Tell me, what was you saying? Who?
Jeremiah Odell.
Jeremiah Odell, okay.
Yeah, I'm tying into his brother, Sylvanus Odell. And I have 2 applications right now that are being reviewed in Washington, D.C. to prove Sylvanus and their father, Elijah, as a new American Revolutionary War patriot. I found where Elijah paid the supply tax in Shenandoah County, which gives him automatic service for the D.A.R to show for service. So, now Sylvanus, he was a military person through and through. I found lots of records where he was a lieutenant, he was a corporal, he was just good old basic, private. But there are records, a lot of records out there that do exist. You just have to know, like I said, we're looking at, and I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't already know. Rock, you know, you've written books and research, and all of you guys sound like you're way more experienced than me. I feel like a newbie up here compared to you guys, but I was pleased to be invited today to talk to you guys. Does anybody have any questions about D.A.R? Any ladies here interested in joining D.A.R?
Amy, my question is the documentation part. That to me is the challenge, because you can talk to somebody and they'll say, oh, related to so-and-so and so-and-so, but that getting the documentation is the challenge. And how is that recorded in your records?
My personal records?
If I look at that document, 300 pages you got, how do I know the source for Aunt so-and-so?
Well, like if I have her birth record, is that what you mean? Or like?
Yeah.
I have I've either went to the courthouse or I have found a record through the West Virginia Culture site where you can actually look at the documents, the books that have been digitized. And I use that site and that website as my source, or I use the courthouse record that I found to prove that.
Would you then cite that in your records?
I do.
So if somebody questions it or wants to, they can go
Yes.
look at that?
Yes.
So you can get there digitally?
You can.
Okay. So,
yeah, right in the back of my 300 pages there, it lists the website that I've got and the document number. Now, of course, the West Virginia Culture site's kind of changed now since their computer and all their databases got messed up during the tornado a couple months ago. So I'm not sure. I have a lot of West Virginia Culture things documented, so I'm not sure how if that has changed much as far as like the document number. I haven't really looked at it much lately, so.
I've got a question now. Debbie, you're connected with Benjamin LeMasters. So we know who Benjamin LeMasters is. I'm sure everything connected to him has been documented. How could Debbie work her way back? I mean, she knows her connection. I know her connection back to Benjamin LeMasters. What would she have to do if she wanted to?
If she wanted to join the D.A.R?
Yes.
Well, I would meet with her. We'd pull up her first 3 generations, her being generation number 1. We would go to her parents, and then the grandparents, and then just follow that line that we know would lead to Benjamin and LeMasters, and just start her applications to process with all the documentation like wills, deeds, things that just prove 1 generation all the way back to LeMasters.
So, you know, and my wife's connected too.
Because, not to interrupt you, but because Benjamin LeMasters is already a proven patriot, we would not have to prove all the way back to him. We wouldn't have to prove his, like, if he was not already proven D.A.R. patriot, we would have to prove his service,
Okay.
where his residence was during the time of the American Revolution. But because he's already a proven patriot with many people under his number, we could pull up her line, pull up her ancestors. Probably in the long run, she might only have to prove maybe just a couple generations, and just provide that documentation. Her first 3 generations as a new member, which would be her parents, her grandparents, see where her lineage falls
Right.
compared to other. We would just document her to those other applications of people that have already proven
okay.
him. So it's not a long drawn out process if it's a proven patriot and there's a lot of people under it. Like Lemasters, there's a lot of people under him in the database. It wouldn't be bad at all. I mean, now the process for prospective members that are just now joining D.A.R, the turnaround time is about 3 to 4 months to review all the applications and the paperwork. Now, for me, as an already established member, when I want to submit a new application under like a supplement, they call it a supplemental application, it's a 2-year process.
Right.
And COVID just made that worse. So they have new genealogists and working in Washington, D.C. and I think probably not S.A.R, Sons of the American Revolution. Is anybody here an S.A.R member? I don't think they kind of, if you are a D.A.R member, or you know somebody in your family that's a D.A.R member, I think they will accept the D.A.R member's application as a proven documentation for the sons, like somebody trying to get the S.A.R. They'll accept our documentation and they don't have to prove anything. I think is what somebody told me one time.
I can make a couple of comments. My experience has been D.A.R is much more anal about documentation.
Yes.
So if you've got a proven D.A.R member, S.A.R will accept, but vice versa is not true.
Right.
D.A.R will not accept the sons as documentation because their approval process is not so demanding. And when it comes to documentation, somebody asked a minute ago about documentation. Sometimes you have to get very creative. Back until 1790, it's relatively easy because that's when the census began. And as long as you've got those every 10-year records, then you've got a place to start, a county to start, you know, a name to start. And it's not always easy, but it's a lot easier. When you get beyond 1790 and you no longer have any census records, then sometimes it gets very creative. And for example, I spent 5 months in isolation, isolation, working 10 hours a day. But I had to go back to the Patriot. I could not find any family member related to me that I knew of that had a D.A.R number that I could start keying off to. So I had to go back to the Patriot. But within 5 months, I had 29 patriots that I believe I'm descended from, but I could document one real fast in order to get by the local requirements, the state requirements, and the national requirements. So I got approved within 2 months of submitting an application. And then I decided, well, great, if I'm in D.A.R, I want to be in the Mayflower Society. I've been 6 years trying to get that done. And I'm to one generation that 4 brothers moved from Massachusetts to New York and bought a piece of property, and all 4 brothers lived on the same property. And I know that the daughter, Abigail Packard, I've got every documentation from Abigail Packard down, approved. But I tried in Florida, and they said, well, which one was her father of the 4 brothers? And I have proof that she was born, I have proof that she was a teacher in that town, and so forth. And I believe that Bartholomew was her father. But they said, you gotta find a piece of paper, it's got her name and Bartholomew's name on it. Well, I can't. So they said she could have been raised by an uncle who was Bartimaeus. And I said, what does it matter? Whichever one of these two is her real biological father, that still makes me a direct line from the Mayflower. And they said, no, you gotta have the documentation, we gotta see a piece of paper. I've been hunting for that piece of paper now for 5 years, reading every article that I can find, newspaper, reading related things. So when she says documentation can be easy, it also can be extremely difficult. Now, in getting in D.A.R, I bypassed the Civil War quickly. And I believe I have 28 patriots, one of which was in the Union Army and 27 of which was in the Confederacy. And I have not submitted my application because it's not politically correct right now to be a Confederate daughter.
Depends upon where you live.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there's a lot of places where I don't want to put that on my resume. And it's silly. It's silly. We're talking about biological records of people who built this country, lived, died, and so forth. And yet, the documentation, and I will tell you, I found a witch hung at Salem. The second woman hung there was a great ex-grandmother. And, but I found really interesting stuff, like a local Confederate soldier. His name was David Frame. And something just seems interesting because I was reading about he had a divorce and he married a 17-year-old neighbor. And it said the court records were quite juicy, so they became famous. Well, I went back to get that court case and I found it and I read it and how they proved that he was sleeping with the 17-year-old before. But what had happened is the farm had been given to them, he and his wife, as a dowry. And they were married, and then he was sleeping with this neighbor, teenager, and he divorced his wife and he wanted to keep the farm. Well, it went to court as, you know, who could get the farm. And the court case was resolved in his favor, so the wife had to go home to her parents, penniless and without a home, you know, back where she was. But in reading this, quote, juicy court case, I read the last page and turned it over, and it said that this case was, the attorney for the guy was a young law student, just out of law school, Thomas Jefferson.
Oh.
So you find these hidden gems in the most wonderful places of finding this documentation. And once you get hooked, I also have 10,000 and some, but I didn't go laterally. I did not get brothers and sisters. The records were too big, too many, I couldn't do it. I just went 10,000 this way. Now, and I'll tell you one more interesting thing about mine is when I hit certain milestones, I rejoiced. And one of the milestones was D.A.R. when I hit my first Patriot. But you'll find when you hit one, you hit many, because you'll find a whole community of people that tend to be related to each other, and you'll jump through a lot of interconnectedness. I found in one place 5 brothers that was married to 5 sisters.
Well, that sounds like the Masters, you know, he had, I think, all daughters, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. And they married into all the problem, like the families that you would think of in Nicholas County that are also patriots.
But getting back to more on the point, if you go back further than 1790, you have to get very creative. And the one that I'm looking for the Mayflower Society, the National Mayflower Society said they would accept a Bible. But the Bible had to be printed by a certain date. The Bible couldn't have been a reprint for it to be authentic, and so I had to get the front page of the Bible to go along with the handwritten entries by the family
And you
itself.
know, Ron, the D.A.R. is the same way.
Yes.
They would require that too.
Yes. So documentation can be quite a problem. And then you jump to Europe, and then you've got to have church records. That's about where you find everything in European is by the birth, death, christening are going to be in the church records. And there's where you go to Utah for those. And I've actually made trips out to Salt Lake City looking for various things. I am convinced that I am a princess. I am convinced that I am the direct descendant of James V of Scotland, the father of Mary, Queen of Scots. My documentation is pretty good. So I'm convinced. The reason I'm convinced is I think my documentation is pretty good. I don't have any societies to get into over there, but I just want to be a princess. I'm sorry to interrupt, Amy.
Well, I guess I'm kind of a princess. I descend from King Edward I through my Claypool family from England, who came, they were Quakers and came with William Penn into Pennsylvania and ended up in New Jersey and ended up in Virginia later on through via Pennsylvania and some other states in between. And so, but now the documentation from James Claypool Sr. is documented very well all the way back to King Edward. And I have pretty good documentation from James down to myself.
Well, that's the same way. When you hit royal, all of us came from Europe. Just about everybody in this room probably came from Europe. And if you go back far enough to hit royalty, you get really good documentation.
Mm-hmm.
But you also hit hundreds of dead ends where you can't find who their father or mother was.
But if anybody's interested in D.A.R., I mean, and you wanted to meet later on, I would be happy to help anybody here try to get into D.A.R. I'm actually working on a couple applications right now. We're kind of stuck with a couple of supplementals. D.A.R. changed their process with the supplemental. We only have, if it's rejected by National Society, we only have 1 year to fix it. Used to be 2 years, now we're down to 1 year. So I'm working on the George Cutlip line, who ties into Patrick Murphy's daughter. There's a couple of different George Cutlips, one's from Nicholas County, one from Braxton County. D.A.R. would not accept the documentation we provided. So that does happen, and we have to go back to the drawing board.